Those who were adults in 1950 to 1970 could be excused for assuming life at the turn of the century was going to be approaching an ideal existence. Many in this time thought 2020 would be a period where everyone lived in luxury, served by numerous robots within a fully mechanized and enlightened society. If anyone in 1970 would have predicted your people would no longer be able to afford a home of their own and the elderly were choosing suicide because living was no longer a sane option, they would have been mocked. Yet this is the point at which we are at. In the middle of the 1900s, one man could have 5 children and a wife and support them all on a single income. In the mid-2020, not even single men can make ends meet. In 1950, the average weekly wage for a middle-class man in the United States was approximately $2,500, though it varied by occupation and industry. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, the median annual income for men was approximately $2,570 in 1950. Assuming a 52-week work year, this figure gives us an income of about $49.42 per week. 1. Middle-class occupations like manufacturing workers, clerical staff, or skilled trades, e.g., carpenters, electricians, often earn slightly higher wages. For example, production workers in manufacturing industries averaged around $54 to $60 per week, depending on the state and specific role, as reported in the Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS, Bulletin No. 1173. In contrast, lower-paid middle-class roles, such as retail clerks, earned closer to $40 to $50 per week. 2. These figures reflect a time when a single income could often support a family, with median family income around $3,300 annually. Adjusted for inflation to $2,025, $49. 42 in 1950 equates to roughly $600 to $650 per week, though purchasing power comparisons are nuanced due to differences in living costs and economic conditions. 3. In 1950, the average cost of a new American car was approximately $1,510, as reported by multiple sources including the 50s Web and FamilyTree.com. Prices varied by make and model. For example, a Ford ranged from $1,339 to $2,262, while a Kaiser Frazer Henry J cost around $1,299. Adjusted for inflation, $1,510 in 1950 is equivalent to about $18,000 to $19,000 in 2025 dollars, reflecting the lower purchasing power and simpler features of cars at the time. 4. In 1950, the average cost of a family home in the United States was approximately $7,354, according to U.S. Census Bureau data and historical records from sources like the 50s Web. This figure varied by region and home size, with suburban homes often ranging from $6,500 to $10,000. For example, a modest single-family home in a middle-class neighborhood typically fell within this range. Adjusted for inflation to $2,025, $7,354 equates to roughly $88,000 to $92,000, though differences in construction costs, land values, and economic conditions affect direct comparisons. Estimating the cost to feed a family of 4 in the U.S. in 1950 relies on historical data about food prices and consumption patterns. Based on information from sources like the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS, and historical records, the average weekly grocery cost for a family of 4 was approximately $15 to $20 in 1950. This translates to an annual cost of about $780 to $1,040. For context, specific food prices included, bread, 14 cents per loaf milk, 82 cents per gallon ground beef, 53 cents per pound eggs, 60 cents per dozen potatoes, 5 cents per pound. These figures come from aggregated data on the X platform and websites like the 50s Web. The BLS consumer expenditure surveys from the era suggest that food accounted for roughly 30% of a middle-class family's budget, with home-cooked meals being the norm. Adjusted for inflation to $2,025, $15 to $20 per week equates to about $180 to $240 weekly, though differences in food production, variety, and dining habits complicate direct comparisons. To compare the number of weeks' pay required to buy a family home in 1950 versus 2020, we need to use the average weekly wage and average home price for each year. The data used relates to 1950 and 2020. In 1950 the average weekly wage for a middle-class man was $49.42. The median annual income was $2,570, per U.S. Census Bureau. An average family home cost, $7,354, U.S. Census Bureau and Historical Records. The means that it took, $7,354 divided by $49.42 equals 148.8 weeks to purchase a home in 1950. This translates into roughly 2.86 years of income, assuming no other expenses. In 2020 the average weekly wage, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS, for a full-time male worker, was about $55,744, based on weekly earnings of approximately $1,072, as per BLS data. The National Association of Realtors, NAR, reported the median existing home price in 2020 was approximately $296,700. This means that in 2020 it takes about 5.32 years of income to buy a house. $296,700 divided by $1,072 equals 276.8 weeks or roughly 5.32 years of income, assuming no other expenses. In 2020, it took about 1.86 times longer, or 128 additional weeks, to earn enough to buy a home compared to 1950, based on weekly wages. This is nearly double the time. This calculation ignores taxes and other expenses. Housing affordability in 1950 was generally higher due to lower price-to-income ratios, post-World War II economic growth, and subsidized loans, e.g., GI Bill. By 2020, rising home prices outpaced wage growth in many areas. There are of course many reasons for the changes in price and affordability. Two-person incomes permitted higher prices to be paid. Women working also increased the demand for houses, as more single-parent households were created. Lower down payments made housing more affordable but also made it possible to increase prices over what would have been possible had homes been purchased for cash or with a substantial down payment. The lack of children is viewed as an effect, but it is also a cause, in that when people are without children they can engage in more risky activities, such as acquiring excessive debt and engaging in excessive and conspicuous consumption. Longer mortgage periods also enable house prices to rise. With the emergence of asset management firms able to purchase large amounts of housing, house prices are effectively given a foundation beyond which they are not likely to fall. Below-market properties are quickly bought up. Even the normalization of high debt levels makes it more likely prices will rise. If cash payments were the norm, living standards would have to adjust to live within the average wage. Debt, however, at least for a short period, makes it seem as if one was making 10 times what they actually earn. But we have alluded to the possibility of pinpointing a time when it all went wrong. The title suggests a watershed event. This is not to say this event has a known calendar date. But at the same time, there is a distinct difference between building a civilization and destroying one. And while this may appear to be the moment when the discussion gets complicated, nothing is further from the truth. To build a civilization requires value be added to assets. Assets are physical things. These need to be manipulated to make these natural elements into something suitable for human habitation and use. For example, clay is nothing but sticky mud until turned into bricks for housing or implements for culinary and other uses. Out of the same resources animals have, humans make complex environments. So, what we need to do is to not act like animals and live like humans. Where it went wrong is where we lost sight of this simple lesson. The percentage of people who live and think like animals has progressed beyond a point where the few who live like humans can tolerate. For a person, the point at which he loses his or her humanity is when he or she decides to remain immature and not contribute to the upkeep of his or her person. The person who matures physically but not spiritually, is left dependent on others. This makes the person a parasite, and for him or her, This point of decision is when everything heads into the sewer, for them, personally. For society, this point of failure depends on how effective the society is at producing wealth. More developed societies can withstand the cancer of parasitism better than less developed societies. But there is a point where the social envelope will collapse, given enough pressure on its resources. The pivotal point probably came when the Bible was removed from schools, for it was at this point society decided, and Christians concurred, that Christian values would no longer predominate, which opened the door to parasitic influences. Without imbuing children with Christian virtues, the countervailing force of Christian morality no longer existed as a counterweight to the social agenda of the human rights movement. Rights are only valid when balanced by duties. When the duties are pushed aside, leaving only rights, the country is on the brink of a collapse into identity politics. Each group and person puts forward their argument as to why they ought to be exempt from the need to pay their own way. When human rights are put in front of Christianity, the nation and culture falls. References: 1. https://www.census.gov/library/publications/1952/demo/p60-009.html. 2. https://libraryguides.missouri.edu/pricesandwages/1950-1959. 3. https://www.census.gov/library/publications/1952/demo/p60-009.html. https://www.quora.com/could-u-afford-to-live-on-1950s-wages-adjusted-for-inflation-if-you-live-like-most-did-dash-in-the-if-you-live-like-most https://www.enotes.com/topics/domestic life 1950s/questions/approximately how many cars were registered 1950s for 68029 https://www.family-tree.com/blog/cost-of-items-in-1950 https://www.enotes.com/topics/domestic-life-195-0s/questions/approximately how many cars were registered 1950s for 68029